And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. And on this podcast, yet another example of shifting the aggregate expenditure curve in the aggregate expenditure model. So let's go right into our real world event. Fear of increased government regulation causes business leaders to avoid new projects. Okay, let's talk about what this means right here, this word regulation. So regulation is rules that businesses have to follow, that the government puts in place. And these rules, some of them could be, very reasonable. People could argue that the rules are necessary for safety or something like this. Maybe the rules has to do like with a restaurant, how many, the height of the ceiling, the maybe how many fire escapes there needs to be in the restaurant, maybe all kinds of different rules and regulations that the business has to follow. So these rules, as I said, like they might be important for safety and things like this, but they also increase the cost of doing business. And so we could debate all day whether or not any one particular regulation is needed or not needed or worth the cost or whatever. We're not getting into all those normative discussions. We're just saying, what are the effects of regulation on how much a company engages in investment? How much does investment change in new projects and new construction by companies when the amount of regulation changes, when the amount of rules that they have to follow changes, when the costs of opening a business maybe go up or down because of an increase or decrease in the number of rules that the company has to follow. So let's say that business leaders are fearful that all these new regulations that governments are passing are very costly. And if these new regulations are very costly, then new business leaders will avoid new projects. They're just going to say, we were going to do that new project. We were going to invest in opening a new restaurant, but it's too costly. We got to follow all these rules and regulations, and so it's just too costly. We're not going to do it. So my determinant would be a change in investment, and then this would be the expected business conditions. So I'm just going to use BC for business conditions. So it would be a change in investment in response to expected business conditions. And if these companies are going to engage in fewer new projects, then that's going to decrease investment, which is going to decrease the aggregate expenditures. So decrease in investment, which will decrease aggregate expenditures, and that will cause the curve to shift down. That will cause the curve to shift down to, say, AE2. And then what are the results of that? Well, now production is going to be greater than spending. If production is greater than spending, then that means that inventories are going to begin to accumulate. And that means that companies are going to respond by decreasing production until we get to the new equilibrium of, say, Y2. And so that's going to cause a decrease in the gross domestic product. What's our rule? Our rule says this: if business conditions are improving, which typically means that regulations are being removed. This was the, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, this was the one of the Ronald Reagan arguments back in the 1980s. He argued that we need to reduce regulation, get off the backs of businesses, things like this. So this argument would be if you improve business conditions, then the curve would shift up. That is to say, it'd be less costly to engage in new projects and so on. On the other hand, if there's a decline in business conditions because there's all kinds of new regulations, then the curve would shift down. Companies would reduce the number of projects that they engage in. Again, none of this is saying that regulations are necessarily good or bad in and of themselves. Health regulations, whatever. We could debate that all day. We're just asking, what's it do to the cost of business, and then how much does that cause the aggregate expenditure curve, to shift up or down? And regulations is just one example. There's all kinds of things that could change business conditions. If you're in a war, if there could be changes in legal things. So there's all kinds of things that could affect business conditions. Let's say that rule one more time. Improve business conditions, curve shifts up. A decrease in business conditions, curve shifts down. Thanks for joining me. This has been Mr. Hagan on another podcast, and we'll see you on the next podcast.